Guys, girls, and non-binary pearls. Welcome to Buffy Boys. I'm Joel, and I think I'm so fucking smart.
I'm Brian, and I'm really nice.
Oh, that's your whole thing?
Yeah, because now you seem like an asshole.
No, I don't. I seem funny, and you seem like somebody who can't make a joke.
Okay, welcome to Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy The Vampire Slayer from a queer and literary perspective. I'd like to start off by wishing a happy Buffy Boys birthday to Brian, who turned 223 this week. Looking great for your age.
Thanks.
And so from all our listeners, they all sent in letters, faxes, Pony Express, just to say happy birthday for your birthday week. Have I said birthday enough times?
You have. I did not see this coming, and I hate you.
I know. This is my long form revenge. So this is Buffy Boys, where we review Buffy Vampire Slayer from a queer and literary perspective. Everything from A for Angel to Z for Zombie. And this week we're doing B for Bezoars.
Ooh.
Which is the weird demon alien facehugger knockoff in this episode, Bag Eggs, which is episode 12 of season 2.
It was written by Marty Noxon and directed by David Greenwald, and was first aired on the 12th of January 1998. So it's our first 98 episode, which is cool.
Great. Happy New Year.
So let me find my Buffy Ann summary right now. Buffy fights the Gorch brothers, cowboy vampires. In a childcare exercise, pupils are given eggs to care for, which are demonic and hatch spawn that possess everyone save Buffy and Xander. Buffy fights their progenitor, a Bezoar demon, which kills Tector Gorch. She fights the Bezoar demon, but that's it. You know, she doesn't do anything about it, apparently.
Yeah. It just leaves everyone to die.
Yes.
That was a very, dry summary.
It was.
Here's a list of things that happened in this episode.
It was really lacking in flavour.
Yeah. So this is the episode, which, to be honest, I had forgotten about until we were about to record this episode. But this is the episode where they have to take eggs home in that bizarre pagan ritual that Americans do and protect them like their children.
What property does it with bags of flour? Is it Simpsons?
So many. Simpsons Friends, maybe?
Oh, Friends?
I don't know, at some point, because someone have a baby and it's like if you can carry
Saved
in
by
the
the
bag of
Bell?
flour. Oh. No, see, it's not a ridiculous thing I'm saying, because you know what it definitely does happen in it's Frasier. When Niles has been concerned about being a father, he straps a bag of flour to his chest.
Yeah, but there's something in which they like a bunch of kids carry around a bag of flour, and one of them gets it incredibly dirty and just like it's just like
Probably Saved by the Bell.
Yeah, I'm gonna look it up later. Anyway.
We were talking about this earlier, how there's so many things which, because so much of our media is American, that we just don't interrogate as Irish people. But there's all these bizarre rituals, like why are people carrying, why are people doing driver's ed in school? Why are they carrying around eggs and pretending they're children? What are the SATs?
Yeah.
So that's basically this one. This is the B movie weird, creepy facehuggers come out of the eggs, possess everyone, and help them dig something up from underneath the skull. And also we have a little side plot where Angel and Buffy are having some very 16s rated canoodlings, and there are some Texan yeehaw vampires.
Yeah, there sure are. I don't even know where to start with this one. Yeah, it's a weird one. It's it's really generally quite panned as an episode. People do not like it, but I didn't have any problem with it. As in, I think it did exactly what it meant to do. Just it was really stupid and fun. Whereas, I think Ted was actually a bit, tonally fucked.
Yeah.
I think this was just fun and stupid.
Both of them are kind of, I think they're playing with the trope, but both of them are a little PSA.
Yeah, sure.
Are a little very special episodes, just because, more so than most episodes, this episode, which we're going to talk about, is very much about the dangers of sex, teenage sex, and then Ted was obviously about parental issues and kind of about violence, about women and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, at least so that episode didn't really handle that, whereas very well. I thought Ted just didn't handle the whole abuse situation well at all, obviously.
Yeah.
Whereas this episode, I think, sets the stage really nicely for the episode to come, which is Surprise, in which Buffy and Angel have sex for the first time, and that has disastrous consequences. Yeah,
it reads like it's a bit of a play for laughs in this episode about how sex can have disastrous consequences, how you have to be responsible about it, etc. And that's literally what happens to Buffy, is this interplay in this episode between Joyce saying she needs to be more responsible. She's kind of going on a downward path again. Anyway, it's very rich. Before we get into that, though, what I do want to talk about is I had a very productive week in terms of my Buffy research. Because I know we're always talking about how you read 10 articles and you read all these books, etc. But I think I've really topped the charts this week.
Next week is going to be fucking hell, Joel. There are literal full chapters and books written about surprise innocence. Mm-hmm. And Innocence is actually like Joss Whedon's favourite episode. And Christine Sutherland, her favourite episode too.
Put it on a post-it note. I'm going to put it on your screen from when we talk about Buffy, what that actor's name is.
Yeah, please do. But because like it's huge. It's amazing. I can't wait. But there's so many essays written about it.
But perhaps more importantly, speaking of rituals, in my late toy show moment, I read the Buffy children's book that I bought. It's called Buffy, and it's actually quite interesting. So this was published.
It's actually quite interesting. Is actually the name of your autobiography, right?
It's one of the chapters for certain. So this was published in 2018, and it, so obviously being a children's book, it's positioned to explain the Buffy concept to kids who obviously wouldn't know what Buffy was, and to try and do it in a useful way. And what I find very interesting about some of these weird remake kind of side properties is they're often reinterpreting the core Buffy idea. So looking at the back, and I'll tweak some pictures of this as well so you can kind of get a sense of what I'm talking about. I presume I'm not going to get sued for that. But it's, Buffy's in the 8th grade. Giles is their friendly librarian, and they still live in Sunnydale. They go to Sunnydale Elementary School, and they're still vampires, but they're a little more kind of, what was that film called, My Little Vampire?
The Littlest Vampire?
The Littlest Vampire.
With Jonathan Lipnicki?
They're cute. They have fangs, but they're very much blunted fangs, and they have kind of a whole pop-up book aesthetic to it. So on the back here we have, what's that strange sound coming from inside the closet? When 8-year-old Buffy Summers hears odd noises coming from her bedroom closet, she asks her best friends to help investigate. It's a sleepover party they'll never forget. And there's just a weird revisionist thing. So they're reading like ABCs of vampires. Willow's, to be honest, Willow's dressed exactly like she dresses on the show. She's just wearing dungarees and like a candy cane top. She's very excitedly reading a book that says spells.
Oh, good.
And so they have that. It's actually, I was actually surprised to see how they decided to interpret it, because they still know Giles. And Giles says at one point, they're hearing monsters in the closet. And Giles says, how can I help you? Buffy says, there's a monster in my closet. And he says, what's the problem? And she says, the monsters is the problem. And at this point she decides to tell, Giles told me something I would never forget. You're not an ordinary child, you're a slayer. You can fight the monster. You just have to open the closet door and face it. And then the point there is that, Giles says, you don't have to learn how to be a slayer now. We'll teach you in a few years. But for now, you just need to confront your fears.
Oh,
and it's this weird kind of sliding continuity thing, as if, Buffy had always grown up in Sunnydale and she was being trained as a potential from a young age. And then eventually when they do crack the closet, and everyone learns the lesson, everyone learns to be brave, etc. But it is every monster you've ever seen in an episode of Buffy. Mm-hmm. So I'm showing it to Brian now, but we have the gentleman, the
shark guy. Who's that?
He's the lone shark.
Oh, the lone shark. Yeah.
The mantis lady coming in the window, terrifyingly.
Yeah.
There's the Hoffring, the vengeance demon. There is the if we actually go back to the closet, so you have the tiny.
Who's the guy with the? Oh, is that Go Fish, the spiky headed guy?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
Tiny vampire or tiny monster from the Halloween episode. There's just they packed everything in here. People who obviously that Buffy wouldn't have encountered by this point. So I'm like, who is this pitched for? And I think this is pitched for people who grew up watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer and now have kids.
Yeah, sure. But it's not for the kids, it's for the adults.
It is, but I think there's this thing now of, if you want to, millennials and all that, basically being like, if I'm going to be reading children's stories to my child, I kind of want to maximize my time and also introduce them to the concept of Buffy a little bit. But anyway, it's quite a good, I think, transliteration of what Buffy is into a more acceptable children's context. I just had some interesting art to it. But yeah, it's such an odd artifact that I just stumbled across when I was looking for another Buffy book, and it's out there. So I just think, just enjoyed it. It was cool.
That's cool. Nice.
And they also have a whole section where whenever they say Xander, they have to have Willow being like, it's pronounced Xander and it's spelled with a Z, or Giles, it's like, it reminds it Miles, because there's all these bizarre, you don't want to end up with a Hermione situation.
Oh, God,
this kind of thing, yeah.
That's specifically how we pronounce it when we were younger, Hermione.
Yeah.
you said so one of the like most disturbing things about our podcast is that every week we sit down and right before we start we decide what we're going to like have light-hearted banter about beforehand to start the episode, which is, you know, the dullest and nerdiest thing you could ever do. But
the only thing that makes it duller is explaining. That's what we do.
Yeah. But I can't think of a smooth way to transition into this. But you wanted to talk about the movies we watched this weekend.
Yeah, no, I think my brand here is dull, nerdy, but completely genuine. So I actually do think these things are connected, because they're kind of like weird fantasy properties. And we went on a bit of a binge this week in looking at, we watched Dark Crystal.
Sure did.
Which I've never seen before. We watched Return to Oz, which I had seen once as a child and was terrified of, and I didn't really remember. Was that the only two we watched?
Those are the two big ones. We watched Parent Trap as well.
Parent Trap, which I've never
amazing.
seen, which is a different fantasy horror film. And I intend for us to watch Legend, which has a very young Tom Cruise and Tim Curry as the devil, and also Willow, which has Warwick Davis in it, which I think you've seen.
Yeah, like a million times. And Val Kilmer.
Yeah, and Dark Crystal, which was the first one that kind of got us on the wagon, was the film that was produced just before that same group did Labyrinth. So
Tim Henson's production, Jim Henson's production company.
Yeah, so I just think there's a theme there of like, I actually really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed kind of applying some of the stuff we've done with the podcast in terms of thinking like, why did they make these choices? Why is this bizarre? Saying like Dark Crystal is really dark and has really intricate animatronics, and has some complex themes about like the good can't exist without evil and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, sure.
And then Return to Oz, like we were quite drunk and it was late when we watched it, but I do maintain there are queer themes there. There's a whole conversion therapy thing happening.
Oh, sure.
It's very similar to Sucker Punch, whereas, you know, much more so.
The worst movie ever made, maybe.
Much more so than the original Wizard of Oz, which Brian hasn't seen. It does suggest, I think, that Dorothy is having a mental breakdown, and all of this is happening while she's being electroshocked. Mm-hmm. And there's just, again, great animatronics. There's some really horrific stuff, which I actually think, when you think that the point of the Return to Oz is that the Emerald City has collapsed and is now taken over by these, like, Clockwork Orange gangs.
Yeah.
That's a real deconstruction of the, like, childhood wonder of the first film that people associate with it.
Much closer to the books, definitely.
Yes, absolutely. And you have these gangs where their arms and legs are wheels, but they're such like high octane 80s biker gays, neon leggings, just like roving bands of monstrous homosexuals basically attacking the village, you know. And so it's just been a really trippy few days, I think.
You were saying the lead Wheeler, which is those terrifying guys with the wheels for legs and hands, what turned out to be a puppeteer on Buffy, right?
Yeah, he went on to be a puppeteer in a good few episodes of Buffy. I'll have to find out obviously which ones for when they come up, but the Wheelers, which are these kind of weird rolling monsters in Return to Oz, are essentially puppets.
Yeah. Way less nice than the Mulefa from the Amber Spyglass, which is obviously the third book from his Dark Materials, which is great. Yeah. Which also have basically wheeling, rolling around guys, but they're very nice and they have trunks.
Yeah, that reminds me about a really good essay about race in his Dark Material called The Tragic Mulefa.
Oh, Joel.
That's a deep cut.
That's a bad thing to say.
I think you have to listen to our podcast quite closely to get that, and even when you do, you'll be disappointed in me.
Yeah, you would. So the last thing we were going to talk about lightheartedly and stuff was straight pride. But you know what, Joel? I think if you're listening to this podcast, you probably know what we think about straight pride.
I think you're probably sick of hearing about straight pride by this point.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of, I remember there's this event horizon you pass through when you listen to back catalogs of certain podcasts, which is the Trump event horizon, where depending on where the podcast starts, you can have how much you've listened to.
So true. I hit that with My Favorite Murder the other day, where the episode where right after Trump was elected the next day was recorded, and they're like so depressed and stuff, and I was like if they were the only people who did that podcast episode, you'd be a bit like, oh, that's really interesting, but literally every single fucking person did it.
And I remember that the McElroys were obviously quite depressed, but just didn't mention it for like a long time, because they were basically the opinions like, we don't need to talk about this because it's literally everywhere. So straight pride is not a thing. And let's get into the episode, Bag Eggs, which I do actually genuinely, hand on heart, see some connections between that and what I'm talking about these weird fantasy films, because this episode kind of stands apart from the usual Monster of the Week format, I feel, with Buffy. There's something much more, this is the monsters are on Maple Street. This is a town in middle America. Don't trust your neighbor. People are being possessed. There's a much less logic to it than a Buffy episode usually has, but which lends itself a lot to 1950s B movies and the thing that came from underneath the high school and all that. And the fact that it ties in with don't have sex or you'll die, which is a very common genre trope with teenagers, gives it a really rich pedigree, I think, in kind of sci-fi and genre fiction.
I totally agree. I don't think its execution is that great.
Oh, no, it's trash.
I think it definitely hits on all those things. So yeah, I mean, first up, the point of this episode is, sex and responsibility. At the beginning of the episode, Joyce is all about, Buffy, you're so irresponsible. Is there anything you think about except for boys and clothes? Because the episode opens up very nicely with Buffy and Joyce in the mall, which is where they're going to be again in 2 episodes when they shoot the judge with a bazooka, which is good fun.
Great moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
First introduction of Sunny Day Mall, I'm pretty certain.
Yeah, no doubt. But so a couple of things there. First of all, so there are 2 weird references to sex workers in this episode. Did I say that right that time, Joe?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, great. There's the beginning of the episode where Joyce says that Buffy can't wear the clothes that she was trying on in the mall because she would look like a streetwalker. Which and then Buffy says, but when I'm old enough to wear these, I won't be able to wear these. And Joyce was like, yep, that is life. But that actually reminds me of when I was in secondary school, when one time the principal was doing a big talk in front of the school, and I hated that principal so much. But
she might listen to this podcast, Brian.
If she's listening to this podcast, she knows I hate her. We had a screaming argument in front of the class one time. But, no, it wasn't screaming. I was very calmly standing my ground and destroying her with my words.
And then did the whole class clap?
The whole class clapped. Yeah. Actually, one of the teachers congratulated me afterwards and said, well done. Anyway, so one time she was doing a big assembly thing in front of parents and stuff. I'm not sure what it was. It might have been a 4th year graduation or some shit like that. Something really stupid. Actually, no, we didn't do a 4th year graduation. What am I talking about? But she stood up in front of everyone and was like, Digwit, Ismisha Ban Nahiha, and then she said her name. And basically what that translates to is, hello, I am the woman of the night. And essentially what she was trying to say was I am your host for the night. And she said it, and everyone kind of went dead silent. And no one laughed, but everyone was 100% aware that she had just called herself a prostitute in front of everyone, which is wonderful.
Okay, Brian, that audio is going to peak, and I'm sorry, but I have to say it is a genuine pleasure after 8 years of being with you, though there's still stories I haven't heard. That's an exceptional story. Yeah,
it was wonderful. But anyway, the second reference to sex workers in this episode was when the Gorch brothers were sitting in the
I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. I'm actually knocking you off your rhythm. I'm still laughing over here. Gorch brothers.
The Gorch brothers are in the sewers, and they're talking about Sunnydale being crap and having to lay low and stuff. And it's a really weird POV scene for some vampires that aren't Angel or Spike. I'm not sure how it comes about, but they are talking about how there are no good whores in the area,
quote unquote. Yeah.
Yeah, I would never.
Of course, yeah,
of course, but. It was just so unusual. It's the people who wrote this, does Marty Noxon have a problem with sex workers? Anyway, not that they were negative. Well, no, Joyce's reference to it was pretty negative. And then, it was unusual.
Yeah, and then Buffy said in response to Joyce, at least I'll be a thing, streetwalker.
Yeah.
And I'm not apologetic for this kind of stuff. I think the discourse around the appropriate way to engage with this stuff and how central it was to actual, social justice probably wasn't where it needed to be at the time. And then the weird thing with the Gorge brothers are, so basically they're both rootin' tootin' yeehawing vampires, and the joke from Texas, and the joke is that in 1889 they slaughtered an entire Mexican village before they were vampires, and they literally wear cowboy hats as a whole thing, which
for my money's worth was a little unusual because it does portray them as having the same personality pre-vamping.
Yeah, exactly. So again, one for the weird, not a concept of what a vampire's personality is actually like. But are they, now correct me when I'm wrong, but are they the first vampires we've kind of had as established characters who aren't either, a big bad or one of their lackeys.
Yeah, and what I'd say is actually that like they are some of the only vampires that exist beyond one episode who aren't big characters, essentially, who aren't the big bad. Yeah. Like I mean, because Lyle survives this and turns up again in Homecoming.
Sorry, I think you're right.
Yeah. And I think also in Slayerfest.
Very potentially, yeah.
But what's interesting about that is that he actually survives both of those. Yeah. So he's one of the only vampires that actually survives Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
And it's funny because whenever you see lists of people who've survived Buffy, it's always like Drusilla, Lyle Gorch, etc. And no one appreciates or knows that we found that one girl who was in detention with Buffy, who went to the fishbowl and hung out with bikers. She's still alive out there somewhere. She's Big Bag, season 15. Guaranteed. Yeah. What I actually genuinely thought was interesting was up until now, we've talked a lot about how the vampire myth in Buffy is exporting a old world concept, a classic European kind of middle of the millennia kind of vibe, and these are the first vampires and really the first threat, I feel, that are extracted from America's own history, because they're very much plantation, Red Dead Redemption times, kind of the Old West, etc., and all the issues that come with that, which is interesting because I actually genuinely, because he pointed out to me and I was saying interesting so many times, which is intriguing because something you often find in horror or fantasy written in America is an old literary theory, which is that the land is haunted, and that a lot of it, they tend to extract horror or myth from the fact that Americans have come and taken the land from Native American tribes, and that there's this inherent violence in America, in it both being a stolen country but also a very young and new country that doesn't have a sense of identity.
When the first lecture I ever had in English in college was Bernice Murphy doing American literature, and the first one was like all about how the land is haunted because it's stolen. Yeah. So the Indian burial ground thing, it's stolen ground.
Exactly. And yeah, that's actually another thing that American TV has naturalized to us, which is just like actually quite a foreign concept, this idea of the haunted Indian burial ground. And what they don't often understand is it's haunted because you stole it from them, Yeah, no doubt. But it's something that Buffy has in mind up until now, I don't feel. So this is an interesting, it's played for comedy a little bit, but it's starting to introduce this idea of localizing the horror a little bit more.
I totally agree. One of actually the interesting things about that course that we did in college was that there was lots of discussion about the creation of the American myth and the creation of the American self, because obviously America doesn't have a culture pre 17th century, because it didn't it existed, but like the culture that was there, they have now ignored and they've destroyed to some degree, i.e. the Native American culture. But the American identity, it's so weakened, it's so lacking in a backbone, because you're throwing off the old world and coming to the new, and with that you've lost your stories. So all the kind of like the Rip Van Winkles and stuff, it's so deliberately an attempt to create a culture around America and Irvine, Washington,
all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. So they have real trouble when it comes to haunted houses, because the European haunting is the castle, and the manor, and then the American haunting is the house, the apartment. It's an unusual space.
The basement.
Yeah, no doubt. So going back to the mall.
So just I suppose really to centralize what happens in this episode is that they find a creature underneath the school, or the sex teacher finds a creature underneath the school, which is putting out these face hugger monsters, demon parasite alien things who are possessing people and getting them to dig up the mother creature. And that's kind of a lot of what's motivating this episode, is creepy boggy horror stuff of things coming out of eggs, and the classic, and I think one of the real core monster boggy horror images for me is arachnid or insectoid legs coming out of a million things. Yeah, it's one of the it's right in my room 101 for me, and they have it coming out of the egg, they have it coming out of Cordelia's teddy bear backpack bulging, and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what's kind of motivating a lot of this.
Yeah, no doubt. So in the beginning of the episode, they're in the mall, and we find out that Joyce is buying her clothes from everyday woman. Yeah, okay. I've written in mother, and it's just because I'm going crazy. But everyday woman, which is just so sad. It's just like, and also she's picked out an outfit in advance from everyday woman, and Buffy has to go collect it or something.
On layaway, whatever the hell that is.
It's very weird. But okay, so the point I was trying to get to there was that Buffy finds the Gorch brothers, and she sees them stalking a girl and essentially bringing her into a arcade. and she's playing some pinball, and the guy is standing behind her, and he's like acting very sexually aggressively towards this young girl, and he's vamped, and she can't see him basically because he's standing behind her. But that scene for me was really, really reminiscent of The Accused, which is the 1989, I want to say, Jodie Foster movie, for which she won her first Oscar, in which she's like violently raped in a bar, but just on a pinball machine. And but I actually think, like, I was sitting there, I was like, is this an intentional reference? And I think it might have been, because it was shot quite similarly as well. But that was just something that was interesting, and it's all set in southern states in America.
Yeah.
And it was it's very deep south as a movie, and yeah, it's really interesting. And if you want to watch, one of the most harrowing movies about rape of all time, go watch The Accused. It's a really great movie, and Jodie Foster is a powerhouse because of fucking course she is. She's Jodie Foster.
Yeah, I think I might be wrong, but it's based on a true story, was it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So I think you're right in the sense that I think that imagery is immediately recognisable and evocative to us because it's starting to locate this toxic masculinity, and I think the Gorch brothers are very much a totem of American toxic masculinity in a way that Angelus isn't and Spike isn't necessarily.
Angelus.
Yeah, Angelus. Yeah. Well, because Hector Gorch does actually call him Angelus in this episode.
Does he?
Yeah, he does. Yeah,
that's funny.
So yeah, I think that imagery of a young girl alone in a bar with a man wearing a cowboy hat in this kind of potentially isolated place is embedded there for a reason, and it feeds into, as you said, very much the central theme of this episode, which is sex.
Yeah.
So they introduced this with seeing in teen health class with
they call it teen health. It's like so gross,
But I found it quite confusing because there's a good 2 minutes of the teen health sex teacher, Mr. Whitmore, just talking about sex before he actually contextualizes it as that they're in a health class and that they have eggs to take care of. He's just like, sex is like really confusing. You're all thinking about sex, and he actually specifically quote unquote says, how many of us have lost hours with unwanted sexual thoughts?
Yeah.
And then that leads to a whole jokey thing where Xander's like, I have, and he's like, it was a rhetorical question, etc. But he's just talking about how people think about sex a lot before he's like, oh yeah, I'm in a class and there are other people here.
Yeah, that's great. The interaction between Xander and Cordelia in that scene is pretty great, and also Cordelia apparently has had sex in a car and knocked the drive shift accidentally, and it went rolling down a hill potentially.
Yeah,
which is a great little story.
She does drop that anecdote, so that kind of, if we could take that as I think it's intended to be taken, which is that she has had sex, it does indicate that she's the only one of the Scoobies who has had sex. I
think yes, true. I think obviously we don't consider him a full-on Scooby at this point, but I think Oz has as well.
Yeah, true. I think at this stage I wouldn't consider him a Scooby.
No, me neither. Though he is coming up soon. His episode is in 5 episodes time or something. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, and so then basically what this leads us into is they're all given their eggs. Never really understood why you couldn't just keep it in the fridge and bring it back, because they do kind of...
Yeah, like Buffy has a checklist where she's supposed to burp the egg and feed it and change it. And it's just like, why not just say you did? Don't and say you did.
Yeah. But it brings us into a conversation where they're kind of talking about raising the eggs, and Xander says he's going to teach her Christian values, more weird religion stuff, and then Willow says that her egg is Jewish, which was like a first confirmation, like really solid confirmation that Willow Rosenberg is Jewish.
Yeah.
But we have...
Every trivia thing I looked up from this episode was like, Rosenberg, which, is a clue that she's Jewish, but it's actually a German name that means castle something.
Castle of Roses.
Yeah, and...
But yeah, it does, but that means nothing.
Yeah, but names... also like the name Rosenberg is only useful insofar as it sounds kind of Jewish.
True, and probably one of the more famous kind of Jewish women in American history was her surname was Rosenberg, Ethel Rosenberg.
Indeed.
I don't think it's a reference, but I think it's direct, and she was like one of the elements of her kind of parishing history was that she was Jewish. So I don't think it's I think it's meant to read as Jewish when you have Willow Rosenberg.
100%. But people are like, it's actually German. It's like, no one gives a shit.
Yeah.
When people hear Willow Rosenberg, they're like, Willow's Jewish. That's cool.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they have basically they have a thing where because Buffy's left with the odd numbered out egg, she's going to be a single mother. And there's a whole thing about how she's not ready for kids and she's going to end up like a single mother like her mother was, and which obviously she does eventually end up being a single mother after Joyce dies.
To Dawn?
Yeah, she is or a single person guardian essentially. But
yeah, sure.
She has a single mother life, you know? Which I think would be interesting to see because how much she's like going to end up saying to Dawn, you need to be responsible, young lady, etc., etc. But you know, it's an interesting note to take here. I think
it is, and you know, through this episode where you know it's all about sex has consequences. Throughout, Angel and Buffy are doing their most passionate making out, all in cemeteries, while Buffy's supposed to be
hunting.
Supposed to be what do they call?
Patrolling,
sorry.
And there's a scene where they're out looking for the Gorch brothers and they're like, we can't see anything, let's keep making out. And then the camera pans and the Gorch brothers are sitting on a wall 3 meters away from them.
Yeah, no, it's mad. Yeah, so like, I mean, we have to look at the connection between sex and death. There again, the Le Petit Mort. They're like, making out in graveyards again, but also, of course, it just indicates a continued escalation in their relationship, which is going to climax in the next episode.
Like, I really ended up thinking about Angel's arrested development in this episode because Angel is, what do we say, 225, around that.
Yeah, sure.
He's had sex many times with many people. What is he doing in this relationship with a 16-year-old?
It's very difficult to explain. In fairness, she's about to turn 17.
She is. When you take a step back, he's very, like, all he sees in his future is Buffy, and not that he shouldn't be content with the chasteness of the relationship, but it is an exaggerated example of how men of a certain age can sometimes prefer a relationship with younger women because it's simpler and there's less of the complexity. Like, you can't get more of a complexity differential.
Yeah,
in some ways.
Yeah, no, it's true.
And I know he's a vampire and whatever, but this episode they do end up talking about how he can't have children, and they confirm that vampires are sterile. And about
is that just like a little plot note, just so that's not what we're worried about for the next episode?
I think it's definitely an important one to be clear about, because you don't want the next episode to have any other connotations other than the really, I think, distilled connotation it does have.
Yeah, which is men can go awful.
But like the loss of virginity, loss of innocence, and virginity not necessarily being innocence, but anyway, look, we're going to get into it.
Sure.
But yeah, no, I do think it's an important note of housekeeping to clarify that he can't have kids, which is actually ironic, and I think I'm using that correctly. I always use that. You'll pull me up on it, but anyway, he is actually the only vampire ever to father a child.
Yeah, it's ironic.
Great. So he eventually fathers Connor in the series.
He sure does. So apparently, one of the trivia things I read about this episode, and I don't believe it for a second, and I'm not sure where it came from because I only found it on IMDb, which I've started to check for trivia notes because people edit those things and they put in weird things. I'm always like, even if it's wrong, I don't give a shit. So apparently Buffy, Sarah Michelle Gellar and David Boreanaz, before scenes of kissing scenes, would eat disgusting stuff like onions and garlic and cheese and stuff.
Okay.
To pull a prank on each other so that they'd have to kiss someone with horrible breath.
That's gross.
It's gross, but it's also just like, what?
Yeah.
What? Where does this information come from? I don't believe it for a second. It's all mad. I have three big question marks beside this note. So there you go. Now you have to know that too.
Yeah. They do spend an inordinate amount of time focus on Xander and Cordelia kissing compared to what I remember. They
do. I mean, like, Cordelia is absolutely Buffy's shadow self in this episode. Mm-hmm. She's thinking about sex a lot. She's making out with someone she shouldn't be making out with in closets, i.e., Buffy and Angel being a forbidden love because he's a vampire and she's a slayer. Cordelia and Xander being, a forbidden love because they hate each other. Their interactions are actually full of chemistry. I think that they're great little engagements where she's like, I want the light off, and he's like, could you please not talk?
Yeah.
And then accidentally touching and making out again, and really, really awful music in the background with 80s Lethal Weapon
crescendoing
slide guitar solos. It's awful.
For a couple who are meant to be the side couple who don't really work together very well, they actually do work together weirdly well, even out of couples who have been on the show. Because I know later on, obviously, Cordelia has that relationship with Wesley, which never rings super true.
Yeah, true. no one can match Cordelia's energy. That's why no one ever like manages to be in a good relationship with her.
That's true.
So, would we consider this episode to be a public safety announcement? Does it actually? So, from my perspective, okay, if you're talking about Buffy and like very special episodes and public safety announcements, i.e., something with a very special message, like homelessness is a real issue and maybe homeless girls you see on the street are actually angels.
If you've been affected by this episode, please call this number, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So I don't think it is, because I don't think it's very effective at displaying sex as being a negative or something that you should avoid. As I think it's riffing on that more so than anything else.
Playing on the structure, definitely.
Because if you look at Beer Bad, which is an actual PSA episode, I think they might have gotten funding for that episode to say, like, don't drink when you're in college, kids, because you'll turn into a literal cave woman.
Yeah.
I don't know. This episode kind of rang for me as like playing on the trope.
I definitely didn't get a vibe from this that it was actually trying to tell us not to have sex. Even less so than horror films where the trope is where people have sex, they die. I think it was very much taking the trope of the high school structure and the very special episode and kind of using it to elaborate on something. But yeah, in a way that still comes off a bit like the subtext has rapidly become text in this one. I can kind of see what they're doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, yeah, you mentioned earlier you thought that this episode was like quite connected to sci-fi B movies and stuff. I mean, there's a really obvious invasion of the body snatchers thing going on here, and Alien. Yeah,
so Alien very much so. Actually, I think only really in the fact that the
design,
the design of the demon Bazoar babies look a lot like the face huggers, and some of the imagery of it coming out of the egg and jumping towards people are very obvious in Alien.
And
references.
It's dropping onto her shoulder, just like it drops onto Ripley's shoulder in the medbay, I want to say.
Yeah, after it dies, essentially, yeah.
I think I said Ripley there, and I think that's right.
You're right, yeah.
Nice.
And let's point out, she Buffy does name her Bazoar egg Egbert.
Yeah, she does.
Important piece of trivia. But there's a really, actually squeamed at it so much when this really super long, like 9 foot long leg comes out of the egg, and it just goes directly into her ear.
And it turns out to have hands.
Yeah, it's like a leg that splits into hands, and then somehow it sucks it back in and re-eggs itself.
Yeah,
it fixes its shell, which I thought was, again, great. Like, that's B-movie logic to it. But the imagery, more so than people become possessed, the B-movie aspect of it for me is kind of filmed at night in the high school. Eventually, they all end up in the basement of the high school, bashing down the wall, and possessed townspeople passing bricks to each other as they excavate this Bazoar, which is meant to be a prehistoric parasite.
Yeah, that one, like, a big question mark for me.
It's another one that for me is like, technically because it's Buffy, this has to be a demon, but you're kind of placing it more in science fiction category here. There's nothing about it that has to be mystical.
What am I thinking of here? It's like, the terror from below the ice, essentially. The Thing, I suppose?
Yeah, or just like either an alien or something that is a monster that's prehistoric but isn't necessarily supernatural as such. Because I've seen this done in shows or films that don't have magic, and they even say that the parasite operates by controlling the hosts using neural clamping.
Yeah.
Which is like, that's just sci-fi technobabble. So it's very much lifted from that, and the fact that when they kill the mother Bazoar, they all fall asleep immediately and wake up and convince each other it was a gas leak in one of the flimsiest denouements in Buffy history. I think the amount of coincidences and lack of investigation that would be required for everyone just to be like, oh, this is what happened, so it's very Invasion of the Body Snatchers or something of that ilk.
Yeah, no doubt. The Bazoar itself, I mean, like, the name of it is very unusual. So if you read Harry Potter, which I presume you have if, you're a person, but a Bazoar features in the first book and also the 6th as the content of a goat's stomach. It's like a kidney stone or some shit like that.
It's a stone that you can find inside an animal, essentially. And it's various hair, particulate matter, etc. that's like hasn't digested and has formed a stone. So it's kind of like a kidney stone, except in something's stomach. And
apparently it cures everything in Harry Potter.
Yeah.
It's in the first potions class with Snape. But yeah, I'm not sure how they got that word for this. Like, in this episode, it seems like a very unusual one. I don't think there's any connection to the origin of the phrase.
No, I think someone was just flicking through a dictionary and was like, that sounds like a monster word, let's go with that.
Yeah, I thought so too. But the design of the Bazoar itself is fucking fascinating. It's like this like pulsing stomach/brain/vagina that's underneath the ground. Mark Field, I was reading, said that suggested that there's a little bit of a vagina dentata kind of reference there, with the kind of like the crumbling concrete all around it and it like swallowing things whole.
Also, the birthing mother creature that eats people when it pulls them inside, like it pulls Tector Gorch in and eats it in a way that's like, it's really ambiguous how it eats it. Like even when Buffy jumps down there, it implies there's a lot more space down there than we can see, because she's basically, it looks like it's specifically just under the floor, but she jumps in with an axe and kills it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that there's a lot of that.
It's very similar to that one in the desert in Star Wars.
The Sarlacc, yeah, kind of, yeah. I can see what you're saying. I think from a casual perspective, for certain, I always feel like the Sarlacc weirdly comes across as more male. I don't know why.
Okay, fair enough.
Where this is very kind of, a lot of the imagery is actually H.R. Geiger-esque in terms of how glistening and fecund and pulsing, moist as an organic tone to it, which is often used to portray various female cogut kind of gestation imagery and this kind of stuff. So yeah, it's gross.
It is gross. It really reminded me of Teeth, that movie, which is great. It's great. It's a great horror movie. Go ahead and watch it.
It is never referenced again. Why is it underneath the high school? Where does it go?
She kills it.
Where does it go? Where does its body go? What about the hole in the wall? Where does that go?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like, they often have an escape hatch out of some of these situations, but this is the most, how did it get there? Why was it there? What happened to it?
I'd agree. Yeah, I suppose it's definitely like the maternal aspects of it are quite disturbing anyway. And it very much ties into the grossness of sex and parenthood.
It makes Joyce try to kill Buffy.
It sure does, yeah.
In the same way that she attacked Spike last time she was in the high school, she's always wielding some kind of axe or something. She comes at Buffy with an axe. Sure
does. And one of the things it does is it makes Cordelia attack Xander, and then Xander just decks Cordelia.
Yeah. It
was kind of disturbing.
I didn't enjoy it, and it's played for laughs, but it very much bakes a situation where he can bait her. Yeah, it was an odd one, and not one that was weirdly mentioned in the roundup, because they talk about how everyone beat up Xander, but not the fact that he beat them up. Yeah,
no doubt. The last thing I'll have about the Bazaar is that it really reminded me of the Brain of Mensis.
From Bloodborne.
Yeah,
I can definitely see that vibe. I'd love to, maybe we should have a look and see what's the myth there. What is that drawing on the pulsating brain? Because there's something in there.
Yeah, I wonder actually. There definitely is. Maybe it's... No, I don't know. I don't know that one at all. I'm actually not that great with when it comes to 50s sci-fi.
Yeah, I'll look into that one.
Do.
But we have everyone passes out. Giles watched. Giles passes out again.
Oh, good point. That actually didn't occur to me. Nice.
And he has a good bit of, Anthony Stewart Head has a good bit of acting there, because he portrays, I've said this before, he portrays scenes where Giles is meant to come across as normal initially and then turns very sinister. And there's a bit where we don't think he's been possessed by Bazaar, and then he like drops one on Joyce that comes across very Hannibal Lecter and very menacing, which I really enjoyed.
There's a really odd tension in this episode between when the people are possessed by these eggs, which is that like when it's just at the start of the episode when Willow's just been egged, she's like super still of her personhood. She's really capable of communicating and manipulating, and so is Giles when Joyce comes along. But then once that's happened and they all get called into the basement, they all completely lose their personality and are just like
zombies,
zombies, etc.
Yeah, very much so.
It was really like, it was totally just because the plot dictated that should be the case, but it was weird.
Like Egg Giles has tics. He's talking about things that Giles is interested in.
He tries to hide Buffy's Slayerness from Joyce, which is not something you'd think that the
egg would do.
The egg would bother to do, yeah.
And also, just jumping back to the bit of the start of the episode where Joyce is like, "What are you always thinking about?" And Buffy's like, "I'm thinking about saving the world from vampires," which is just so like, try harder, Buffy, with your secret identity.
Yeah. But the Buffy Joyce interactions in this episode are actually kind of great, to be honest. So, you know, they're out shopping in the mall, which is just lovely. I just love anything where they just talk to each other. Mm-hmm. But then later on in the episode, Buffy wakes up quite tired because she's been probed by an egg all night. I'm not sure why the egg didn't fully invade her at that point. It's very unusual.
Yeah.
But Joyce gives out to her for not eating enough, and that's a consistent issue, like thing that she says. And it always, for me, like has a little bit of Is Buffy does she have a slight eating disorder? Because she is referred to as not eating a good amount.
Did you make a lot of references to that? Yeah.
Yeah, which is a bit unusual. And she drinks coffee, and then later on in the episode, Buffy it phones Willow at 2:30 in the morning after she's come in from her patrolling, and she's like, Willow, smash your egg, because her eggs just attacked her, and she uses scissors to destroy it a couple of times. And Joyce hears this and grounds Buffy for a few weeks for being dressed basically at 2:30 in the morning. But just all the interactions are great, and they like Joyce and Buffy have so much chemistry. They're just so like wonderful to watch together.
Yeah, absolutely. They have a believable mother-daughter relationship, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Which is rare to achieve. Do you want to move towards the dusting?
Sure fucking do. I want to go have a nap.
Last but not least, I would like to point out that the library is announcing an exciting upcoming event in Sunnydale where their website will soon arrive. I want to go to the Sunnydale Library website.
Are we doing Buffy Bits, are we?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, Ally McBeal poster in the mall for some reason. Mm-hmm. Very unusual. Oh, yeah. Lyle and Detector Gorch. Apparently, these are both characters from the Wild Bunch from the 50s movie.
All right.
They're actually like, those names are lifted directly, and I think they're like related as well. Buffy refers to having a gigapet.
What the hell is a gigapet?
It's a Tamagotchi. It's like
Is it a different brand or is it a predecessor?
It's a different brand of Tamagotchi. Basically, Tamagotchi is sold out immediately when they got to the US. So you had to get like the off-brand one, which was a gigapet, but I think I had a gigapet actually, personally. And then my last one, I think, is that Xander makes a weird Hamlet reference in this, which is that he says it's cruel to be kind. That's a Hamlet reference, and I was just like, that's a bit out of nowhere. It was very unusual.
Is that related to where we're trying to find that song from? Punching Cleo, whatever it's called.
Yeah, so
Finding
one of the
Cleo?
things Letters to Cleo. So one of the things I read about this episode was that the song Letters to Cleo, Cruel to be Kind, which is also in 10 Things I Hate About You, was in this episode. I actually just didn't hear it in the watch through. I wasn't particularly listening out for it, so that might be why. But I didn't notice it essentially. But Letters to Cleo are like, a reasonably well-known band. Like they featured in Parks and Rec actually at one point. Remember?
They did. Ben really
loves
excited
them.
about it.
Yeah, and he wears a t-shirt about them and everything. But I didn't spot it. But yeah, that would be another reference because that song is Cruel to be Kind.
Cool. Interesting.
And 10 Things I Hate About You being obviously a Shakespeare adaptation of The Taming of the Shrew.
Absolutely. So yeah, and death count for the episode for one that involves so much of the town. No humans die in this episode, or none are confirmed to die. We did have one of our few people of colour in this episode, which was a black security guard who was knocked out. So presumed lived, which will be generous, but also, fulfilling that trope of like, black person goes into the basement of a horror film and doesn't come back out, essentially. But otherwise, the only people who die are Detector Gorch when he's eaten by the Bezoar, and all the various Bezoars that are smushed, frozen, boiled, stabbed, or who all die when the mother Bezoar dies.
I have a question for you. How is Tector killed? Because presumably, like, when he's eaten, is there just some point at which his like head gets removed, essentially? Because you obviously can't kill a vampire. Yeah, by general eating this.
Yeah, but I presume at some point in that mastication, he must have been decapitated.
Okay. I
would have liked to have a cowboy hat just pop back out at the end.
But with a burp, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Perfect. So with our fashion notes, one of the most important things, obviously, being Cordelia's teddy bear backpack.
Yeah.
Wonderful, love it, amazing.
Beautiful, and also a plot point.
Yes, absolutely. I noticed it way before it was a plot point because I was like, that is amazing. My aunt used to have a Shaun the Sheep backpack and it was very cool.
The cowboy hacks never get away from the Gorches at any point. Otherwise, Jonathan is in this episode, giving great victim face again and still dressed like a 10-year-old boy. Like, always comes across like he should be wearing one of those hats that has like a spingy top on it, but dressing quite childlike clothes.
Yep. Joyce shopping an Everyday Woman.
And Willow wearing oversized pajamas, very kind of like onesie almost pajamas.
Giles wearing a tie outside of his waistcoat in the opening scenes.
He just looks like he has a head injury whenever he wears a waistcoat that way. It's very distressing.
Just tie up your waistcoat. It's not hard.
Please, Rupert.
I think that's pretty much all the fashion, right?
Yeah, bizarre, chic, very much in for this season. But otherwise, that's it.
Do you have any other Buffy bits you want to mention?
No, I think I'm good, Brian. Are you good, Brian?
I'm not good.
Okay, so I think we can wrap it up there. Thanks very much for listening. Next week we have bumper episode in Surprise, which we're looking forward to. But yeah, otherwise,
should we do the rating, Joe?
So I think that's the other thing we should do. What would you rate this episode, Brian?
Okay, so I would give this episode 6.3 redheaded stepchildren out of 10.
Okay, very good. Why?
Yeah, I think I gave Ted like a 5.7 or something, and I was kind of basing it on that. This is a more fun episode than Ted. It's less like tonally bollocksed, and it's a bit of light fluff. But a 3 out of 10 seems about right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, 3 out of 5 seems about right.
Sure. Yeah. I think I will probably give it a 6.2 Hoover techniques out of 10.
Very good.
Just because I'm straight up, kind of uncontroversially, I agree with you. I think it was fun. It had a lot of things that I can extract out from a sci-fi B movie point of view to really enjoy it. It had some good comedic moments. It grossed me out at points which I wasn't expecting. And yeah, definitely a nice palate cleanser before we go into surprise.
Yeah, I agree. I'm so excited for surprise. I'm gonna have so many thoughts about it.
Yeah. Okay, so thanks so much for listening to this episode of Buffy Boys. We will see you next week. Please follow us on Twitter, like, subscribe, review, tell your friends, tell your tax collector, and we will see you next week with surprise.
Woohoo!
Okay, goodbye from the Buffy Boys.
Yeah, goodbye for them.
Buffy
Buffy
Boys?
Yeah, Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys.
Okay, Buffy Boys.
Bye now.
See you.